Hello and welcome to this session for the Andrew Brown's Cloud Project AWS Bootcamp. The session we'll be doing today is called The Cloud is Not a Job, or more specifically we'll be talking about the roles in the cloud industry and helping you find and build a learning plan and the perfect role for you. Now, this is the first video in a series that I'll be doing, so I won't answer every single question about every different cloud role in this session today, but we'll just be starting off and starting to look at some of the different roles that exist in the cloud industry and some things to think about when you're doing your job hunt and you're looking at different roles in the cloud. Now, title of the talk is The Cloud is Not a Job, because the cloud industry is huge and there's so many different jobs, so many different titles, and we'll go through quite a few of those today. And the subtitle is Find a Career Path, Build a Learning Plan, and Not Get Completely Lost in the Process, because it's very easy indeed to get lost when you're getting your foundations and your first steps in the cloud industry. But let's go ahead, let's jump straight into it and let's get on with the session today. Now, some of you will be coming to this session hoping for a big old list and a run through of all the different roles in the cloud industry. Now, that's not exactly what I'll be doing today, and for reasons I will explain a little bit later. I've tried to do that in the past, and for reasons that I will explain in just a second, I don't think that that's super efficient. However, if you want that, if you want a list of a whole bunch of different roles in the cloud to research, you can find them here at openupthecloud.com/system. I've created a whole list of some of the most common roles in the cloud industry. It's not exhaustive, it doesn't include in absolutely everything, but it's got a good starting point for you so you can go and do some research into a variance of different roles, not just the main ones you'll hear about a lot, but some other non-technical or less technical roles, some more entry-level appropriate roles, and I've added in there whether they are highly technical or require any existing technology experience. That might help you, might not, but there you go. There's a reference if that's what you're looking for from this session. And like I say, this is part of the free AWS Cloud Project Bootcamp. Now, if you're not part of that bootcamp, that's absolutely fine. You could be watching this years after the bootcamp is finished, but that's okay. A lot of the content, if not all of the content, is generic and doesn't require you to be going through the bootcamp. If you are, I hope you're enjoying the bootcamp, I hope you're keeping up, and I hope that, you're still optimistic about getting all those cloud skills, and you're here now to talk about cloud careers with me. Now, before this session, I sent out a survey asking you for some questions that we will answer in this session today. Now, how to get an entry-level role such as support. So we'll touch on this a little bit throughout the session today. Can an AWS Cloud Practitioner certification get you a job? Certifications is something we will talk about, and we'll also talk about some of the common mistakes that I see people making when getting into the cloud industry. Should we pick one cloud provider or keep an eye on more? AWS, GCP, Azure? This is the thing we'll be talking about as well. How do you pick skills that align to the jobs that you want? Definitely something we are going to talk about. Now, as I say, there are actually 4 sessions that I will do at least as part of this bootcamp, so we won't cover everything here today. And if you want to submit questions for a subsequent session, you absolutely can. You can do that at openupthecloud.com/bootcamp survey. Submit that as many times as you want. I think some people have already submitted multiple questions. That's absolutely fine. That's great. Go ahead and stick your questions in there and I'll try and cover them in these sessions. And if not, I'll put on some Q&A. And you can also find me on social media, drop comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you and try and answer all of your different questions. Now, let's start and jump straight in. Now, I'm going to start with a word of caution, which is that cloud roles in the industry are a bit of a dumpster fire. Now, I don't mean this to be cynical, I say this because lots of people that I speak to who are trying to get into the industry think that cloud roles are consistent across companies, across countries, and they think that everyone's definition of a cloud architect or a cloud engineer is exactly the same. But this isn't entirely true at all, and we'll talk about this today. But this is an important point I want to drive home before we even get into any of the content, and that is cloud roles differ across countries, across companies, and across the roles themselves are just not very consistent. So what I want you to take away from that is, please don't waste time looking for consistency. I get so many people come to me and say, hey, I've been looking at becoming a DevOps engineer, but I went and looked at this job description and that has different skills. I'm really confused. What does a DevOps engineer actually do? And I would say that generally speaking, this sort of line of thought about trying to find some sort of consistency about roles is a little bit of a fruitless task. But don't worry, because we'll talk about how to solve for that today. How do I know this? I know this because I've spent the last few years speaking to and helping hundreds of thousands of different people get into the cloud industry. And last summer, I even went and extracted data from 2,000 different job roles in the cloud, and some of the main ones like cloud engineer and platform engineer. And you know what I found out? That it was just not conclusive in terms of the skill sets. A lot of the skill sets looked very similar, and it was very hard to come up with a consensus and say with conviction, this is exactly the skills for this person. There is some interesting insights from that though. If you want to go check out that video, you absolutely can, and you'll learn a bit more. But that means today we won't go through and run through every different role and try to explain them. Instead, I'm going to give you some frameworks, some things, ways to approach actually figuring out which role to do and how to build skills for it, and how to just navigate building your own roadmap and the questions within that. Because it's a question, how to build a roadmap is the kind of stuff that I get asked all the time. Now, of course, if you came here looking for more of a systematic run through of roles, I did actually do something quite similar for the AWS user group in Douala, and you can find that video online as well. It's called Making Sense of the Cloud and All the Roles Within. So if you want to, go and find that video after. I'll put a link also in the description box down below. However, all is not lost, like I say, because I will go through some ways for you to navigate the industry despite not having this total consistency. The tech industry is new. A lot of these roles are quite new. Let's say if you're an older company that's modernizing and moving into the cloud, these companies, when they're looking for folks to help them out on their cloud journey, they are early on their cloud journey too, which leads to some of the discrepancies that we see and some of the inconsistencies. And the tech industry is evolving constantly. So much change, so many things are changing. So it's not entirely consistent, but that's okay. We're going to figure out how to deal and how to work through that today. Now, how are we going to do that? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of templates. One will be some golden rules to think about when you're adding skills to your own roadmap, and some questions to ask yourself when you're looking at different cloud roles. Now, this is the same templates and the same conversations that I've had with hundreds of different people getting into the cloud industry, and you can take these tools, apply them to yourself, and hopefully get some more clarity about your own direction in the cloud. Now, in terms of today, we're going to break things up into 3 different areas. So we're going to go through some deadly sins. These are traps, mistakes that I see people commonly making, and maybe some sort of paths that you might be thinking of going down, and some sins that you might be committing. But we're going to talk about that a little bit before we get into the roles. But then we'll go through the roles themselves. I'll give you 4 different categories, groupings of different roles, so you can start to think, which category do you fit into, which roles might be the right one for you, thinking about your own personality traits, your past experience, and those types of things. And then the third area we'll get into is building that roadmap, and that will be your homework today from this session. If you're doing the project bootcamp, if you're not doing the project bootcamp, you can still do the homework. You can fill out the templates that I'll give you here today, and it should still help you out as well. Now, before we jump in, let me just tell you a brief thing about myself. My name is Lou, and I've been writing code in the tech industry for over a decade now. And over the last few years, I've really been digging into the career space within the cloud industry. It's where I work. It's the industry in which I work full-time as well, but I now work in product. I started off as a software engineer, front engineer, back-end, infra, platform, eventually ended up in developer experience and dev tooling, and that's where I work today. So I've seen a lot of different things, worked in many different companies, seen lots of different roles, and spoke to a lot of different people as well. So that really helps me when it comes to helping other people navigate their own career, because I've had such a winding path also myself. And then yes, so I run this thing called Open Up the Cloud. You're probably watching this on my YouTube channel. I was in the past a big blogger, wrote a lot of stuff online, and even to this day, thousands of people still read those articles. But I run Open Up the Cloud as what I call a social enterprise, so that is community over profit. So the work that I do, I try and really support the community as best as I can, and any profits that Open Up the Cloud does make, actually every penny so far has been reinvested in the community. I'm really proud of that, because we've been able to give away certifications and help people out and run sessions like this that I hope are helpful for you and help you get into the cloud industry and help demystify some things that maybe for me, when I was getting into the industry, were not that clear at all. And lastly, the strapline I've kind of adopted is I'm looking forward to sharing your I got the job post. I say this because I want you to get into the mindset that you are absolutely going to land that job. Keep hustling, keep grinding, keep doing the work, keep pushing, and then eventually you'll get that moment where you can share online and say, hey guys, I did it, I got the job. And then I'll be there to be able to share that and then celebrate that moment. And we're all here as a community, looking out for you as well. And I think that's just really great. And that's the thing I want you to get into your mind, is that day will come. The day that you get to share that post, that you got the job, will come for you. It's happened to me before. I've sent people messages here to Alex. I said that I was here over, ready to share your I got the job post, and then lo and behold, a couple of months later, there it was, success for Alex landing his job in the cloud. And then I get messages like this, and this is really what drives me is people, landing, in this case, close to a six-figure salary in the tech industry, and I get messages from people that I've helped. And this is really why I do what I do, helping people in the cloud industry. But enough about me. Let's get on to the stuff that we're here today to talk about, which is cloud roles. But actually, we're going to start first with these deadly sins that I see lots of people making. First one, sin number one is the badge collecting. Now, what do I mean by badge collecting? I don't know if you've been a Cub Scout, but they get these badges for the different skills that you get in the industry. You probably know what I'm alluding to here. Yes, I'm talking about certifications. Now, this particular side of the certification industry drives me absolutely bonkers. What I mean is when I see content like this about highest paying cloud certifications, this drives me bonkers because there is not a correlation between certifications and job roles and titles. It's a massive misconception that happens a lot. Now, certifications are great and can be ways that you can produce evidence as part of the job hunt, but it isn't the only way that you can create evidence for your skills, and if you get certifications, it is not a guarantee of a job whatsoever. So when I see content like this, highest paying jobs by certification, this doesn't make any sense. Those people didn't land those jobs and those salaries because of the certifications. They just happen to be the type of people that like educating themselves. That they educate themselves, they get certifications, they also have high paying jobs, but just getting those certifications is not enough, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. But this is one big myth that I see quite a lot. And the reason that comes is also, we're all in the AWS ecosystem. If you're doing the bootcamp, you're learning about Amazon Web Services. Now, if you go and look at the certifications, they are actually named after what looks like job roles or job titles. Now, this can be super misleading, especially if you're coming into the industry. Now, a lot of people I know will even recommend the Solutions Architect Associate as a beginner or entry-level exam into the cloud industry. Now, when people recommend that certification to you, they are recommending you take the certification because it's a broad, generally applicable certification that covers a lot of topics in Amazon Web Services. What they are not saying is that you necessarily should become a solutions architect after that. So there's something that I see people making that mistake every time. They go and take one of these entry-level certifications and then think naturally, okay, I've done the developer associate, I should become a developer. Or I did solutions architect, I should become a solutions architect. But as we'll see today, there are many different roles in the cloud, and those certifications are just roughly classified to sort of, groupings of skills within the Amazon ecosystem, but it doesn't mean that you have to go and do that specific job. Very common misconception, and it can be a bit of a trap, if I'm honest, because then you end up thinking that the only jobs that exist are DevOps engineer, developer, solutions architect, which isn't true at all. Now, as we go through today, I'll read through some of the questions that you submitted, so let's go ahead and take this first one here. Question is, what's the impact of formal certification nowadays? Should I certify to motivate myself to gain knowledge, or should the certification be considered the creme de la creme of skill ladders? Now, I imagine from the introduction you might have an idea of what I'm going to say here. Now, when I'm mentoring and talking to people about certifications, I'm not going to strictly answer that question directly. What I'm going to give you is a framework. And what I want you to think about is when you're getting into the industry, you want to think about credibility. How credible are you for the job that you are applying to do? And with that, you also want to build evidence, concrete evidence that you are credible of that job. Certifications naturally seem like a good way of building evidence of credibility, right? But you have to think across two different dimensions here. That is barrier to entry. How difficult is that evidence? How difficult is it to build that credibility? And then also think about the depth of that evidence. So let's take a couple of examples. I'm going to take the certification. Now, a certification is particularly low barrier to entry most of the time. Now, I say that because some certifications in the Amazon ecosystem, all you need is a bit of cash, £75 or $100 to pass the Amazon initial entry-level exams. So the barrier to entry is basically saving up a little bit, paying that money, and you can get that certification. Most beginners will do some of the associate exams in maybe a month or even 2 months. So the barrier to entry is quite low. And a lot of people in the industry have some of those associate level certifications. So you want to think about that. How difficult is it to land that particular certification? And then you want to think about depth. Now, if you're doing a multiple choice certification, the depth of evidence that you'll be creating there, that you'll be showcasing to an employer, is potentially low. It's maybe not as much depth as that employer wants to see from you from a certification. Now, it depends. Different certifications are different. If you stack multiple certifications, that might show more evidence depth than just having a single certification. If you get the Pro certs, they're more difficult than the associate in the Amazon ecosystem. And some other certifications like the Kubernetes ones are particularly difficult. So the barrier to entry might be quite low, but the depth of evidence that you get from completing one of the Kubernetes certifications is actually quite high. Taking another example like open source, now a lot of open source projects contributing, they can have quite a high barrier to entry. You have to have a certain level of a standard to raise, let's say, a pull request or a code change into an open source or a popular project. Now, if you create your own project, well, that's low barrier to entry because you're just creating it. But if you manage to make that open source project popular in the community and lots of people adopt it, well, that's also more difficult and slightly more higher barrier to entry. And then again, professional certification, higher barrier to entry to land a job as a professional person in the cloud, and also it shows a depth of experience because you've engaged with that job for as long as you've held that position. Now, it's not all about professional experience necessarily, but what I want to do is for you to think about certifications on these two axes. So the certifications that you've got, ask yourself the question, how difficult is it to get that certification? Is it just a case of money, or is it particularly difficult to get those certifications? Do you need a real sense of experience? And how deep is that experience as well? So look at your experience as a whole when it comes to certifications and think about these two dimensions. Someone asked, can AWS Cloud Practitioner certification get a job? So let's go ahead and plot that as well on the different chart that we had. Barrier to entry of the cloud certification is pretty low because, like I say, you can just buy that AWS CCP exam for about £75 or about $100. And the depth of evidence is quite low. A beginner can pass that certification in about a month. So I would say that that's quite low barrier to entry and quite low in terms of evidence depth. So have a think about different ways that you can start to build better depth of evidence, maybe through the projects that you're building in this bootcamp, showcasing evidence, and then also start to think about how you can increase the barrier to entry of your experience. And ultimately what this comes down to is you need to have a direction. You need to have a direction that you're going towards, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about job roles, titles, things like that, and that will help you build your own direction in the cloud about where you're going. And once you have that direction, everything else becomes a lot easier. But you'll be surprised how many people don't have the true clarity that they need when it comes to landing a job in the cloud. That's why I titled the session, "The Cloud is Not a Job." If you're interested in cloud, that's great, but now we need to start to narrow that down. Which job specifically do you want? Which company specifically do you want to work for? Now, when I'm trying to create this clarity with people that I've been coaching in the past, I've used 4 simple questions. Deceptively simple though. Now, what I mean by that is these are actually difficult to answer. If you haven't thought deeply, done your research, this will actually take you quite a while to fill out this template. But if you have done your research, then it'll be quite a quick task for you. Now, there's 4 questions that I typically ask people. Those are, first one is, what do you want to be? I'm going to become a what? That could be a cloud engineer, data analyst, platform engineer. It could be any different type of role in the industry. And that can also be company specific as well. Lots of people want to target some of the large companies as well, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to just be a job title that you're looking for. Now, the second question that I ask, and now this one is deceptively difficult for a lot of people, is why do you think that you're a good fit for that job? Now, a lot of people actually struggle with this because they answer not why they're a good fit in terms of their experience, their personality, their character traits. They say why they want it in terms of the things that they will get from the job, which is not entirely what I'm asking here at all. You know, if you say, I want to be an architect, you say, why? Well, because architects get paid lots of money. I'd say that's a pretty poor answer because that doesn't show that you can be successful doing that. That shows that you have the desire to earn a lot of money in the industry. That's not going to help you when it comes to landing that job. Think about your past experience. You know, what about your history means that you are a good fit for that particular role? If you've, let's say, worked in IT you've worked in IT in the past, then maybe a cloud engineer might be a good fit for you. If you worked in sales, maybe sales engineer might be a good fit for you. Think about the things that you've done in the past and how those skills will transfer over into the jobs that you want to get in the cloud. Then what I'll ask people to do is to pick 5 skills. Now, just 5 because it's so easy to go overboard picking a whole bunch of different skills, thinking about all these things that you want to learn. And then what I often get people to do is write down all the things that you're excited about learning, but that you're not going to learn and not going to look into. The reason I do that is because that allows you to not get distracted. If you come across, I don't know, you're learning things and you discover Kubernetes or you discover, I don't know, serverless development, and those aren't in line with the job that you want, then you can stick those on your not to-do list and then aggressively focus on the things that you can leave behind, you can forget about, and you can buy yourself so much more headspace by keeping those things that you don't need to learn off of the plate and out of your consideration. So those are 4 questions that you'll want to answer. We'll talk a bit later about how this applies to our homework as well, but start to think about that. Start to think about the role you want, why you're a good fit, the skills that you might want to build, and we'll talk about how to pick skills in a second. So let's take another question. There's a big gap between theoretical knowledge of the technology and practical experience, hands-on knowledge. However, acquiring the second requires working with the tech, which is often not feasible without active job position. How to approach this issue? Now, a lot of you will be familiar with this type of question because you'll be thinking yourself, and this is the chicken or egg problem, right, of job searching. You can't get a job because you don't have experience, and you can't get experience because no one will give you a job. It's incredibly frustrating, but there are ways that you can break the cycle. And the way I like to talk about it is, the thing is, there are employers out there. There are many employers out there who need you to be doing the job for them. They have jobs for you to do, and they have those listed up on the internet, and they're just waiting for you to step in and have the right skills that meet them where they're at. And that's the problem. There's a lot of people out there in the industry building skills, but those skills aren't necessarily meeting the demands of the employer. And this is a vitally important thing that I want you to take away from today, is that you want to start looking at the job market, looking at the roles that exist, looking at the skills that the market is demanding, and building a learning plan that meets employers where they're at, meets them with the skills that they are looking for, and provides evidence that you can do the job, that you are competent in the way that you say you are. But the problem is, the difference between your potential skills today and the skills that the employer needs, there is a gap. There is a gap between the skills you have and what they need. So we want to start looking at filling those. Now, one great way is doing something like the AWS Cloud Project Bootcamp that you're doing now. Projects are a great way of building evidence that showcases to employers that you can do the job that you say you can do. If you don't have experience, projects are a great way of plugging the gap. Rather than just saying to an employer that you know something, you've done a course on it, or you've learnt a bit or built something in your spare time, show them, bring evidence, make a project, build it to sufficient depth, add complexity in it. So when you go to that job interview and they ask you, hey, do you know Python? You can say, hold on, just 1 second, let me show you this project I built. Let me show you that I built over the course of a couple of months. I committed many times into this project. I built all these different things, and you have all of those stories to tell as part of the interview about the projects that you built. So that's one way that you can start to plug the gap. Another way is through freelancing. Now, I know a lot of people watching this will be like, whoa, freelancing, I can't do that because I don't have experience. How can I possibly do freelance work? Now, this is a very common way, I think, that you can get around some of the gatekeepers that might exist to when you're getting a job, which is, passing that interview, getting past the hiring managers, ultimately getting a contract and signing it and joining a company. Now, one thing that you can do is reach out to your network, your family, your friends. Do you have a family or a relative that runs some sort of business that you can automate some aspect of their business? You could use them as a stakeholder. Say, hey, can I speak to you? Can I interview you? Can I gather requirements from you and build you a proof of concept or a system in a sort of freelance type capacity? Now, you take that, you write that up, you document all of those conversations, you put that online as part of a project, and there you have it. You have freelance experience, you have professional experience, provided that you treat that experience as professional. It doesn't matter too much if cash has actually exchanged hands or if you actually do that work for money. But then start to think ways of that you can build that experience by, reaching to your network and building small projects for them, but do it with a stakeholder. That way it becomes sort of freelance experience as well. And the last thing that you can also think about here is also teamwork, very commonly forgot. If you have experience in existing industries, IT, you come from sales, consulting, maybe you're a teacher, something like that, then you'll have a lot of the existing ticks in the boxes, such as teamwork, communication. You probably have examples of times that you've shown leadership. Now, companies really want to see that. If you're coming as like a student with not a lot of professional experience, think about building some of these projects as a team. Link up with some other people, work together on the project. That will help you tick that box around teamwork, because that's another big thing that employers are looking for. Do you have the hard skills? Do you have the technical skills to do the job you're applying for? But can you work as a team? Can you communicate? Can you work in a team player? Software, cloud, building things is often a team sport, and very rarely are you working entirely on your own. So you want to show that you can work in a team capacity. Now, we'll be doing some more sessions later. I think it is in 2 months' time, talking about resumes, but I'm going to spoil a little bit of that session just now and talk about how you can represent on your resume work experience and projects as well. Because it's a common question I get, well, how do I represent my resume if I don't have a lot of experience? Now, what I often say to people is Start to think about your projects as experience and represent them on your resume as actual experience rather than having two separate categories. You might have those two categories where you say, here's my work experience, and it's this thin little box, or maybe it doesn't exist because you haven't worked in the industry. And then you have these projects where you're essentially saying, hey, look, I'm a beginner, I've built all these small projects in my free time. Instead, what you should do instead is take that, make the category experience, and then within that have sort of labels where you say, hey, here's my freelance work, here's some open source project work that I did, here's some project bootcamp work that I did. Try and give, some of that experience the real sort of respect that it deserves. It is real, true experience, so represent it as such and don't downplay yourself. The second sin that I see people making is what I call the hide and seek champion. People that spend all their time learning in their comfort zone and don't actually go out and test themselves against the job market. Typically looks like this. Across the course of time, they will spend a vast amount of time learning, and they've always got another reason for another certification or another thing that they need to learn before they go out and start their job hunt. Now, what I would actually suggest to you is don't treat the job hunt like it happens at the end of the process. Start it from the beginning. Expose yourself to the feedback loop of the job market. That will help refine your learning plan and refine the direction that you're trying to head in. Don't just get your head down and start doing lots of learning. You're following this session now, so we're talking about careers. That's great. That's going to help build that direction, which will help then get feedback, which will also refine that direction as well. Now, one big challenge people often get as they start to build that learning plan and pick which job to go for in the cloud is they start listening to any and all feedback that they get. They go on social media and someone says, hey, you should learn this or you should do this. And then before you know it, they're scattering off in a whole bunch of different directions. The thing is, you don't have to take all of the feedback that you get from different people. Whether that's feedback you get from the job interviews that you do, or that's feedback that you find online or speaking to people in communities. Take that feedback, say thank you, be grateful for that feedback, but you don't have to take on board all of it. If that feedback pushes you towards the direction you're going, perfect. Maybe you want to take that on board and acknowledge that feedback. If not, then maybe you can discard it, because if you're not careful, before you know it, you're getting pushed in many different directions, and you might be pushed into directions that you don't want to go, that are not in line with your direction where you want to take your career. So as I say, don't become the hide and seek champion. Start to think about interviewing early in the process. When you start out, do quite a lot of learning, but then start to build your resume, start to apply for jobs, start to interview, because that's going to create a feedback loop that will help you refine your learning plan and make you figure out, am I learning the right things, or do I need to pivot or change or adjust my plan? Now, the last sin that I see is the Ash Ketchum. It's the Pokemon. It's the gotta catch 'em all of the different skills in the cloud industry. People typically will go out and find a roadmap like this one here, which is a DevOps engineer roadmap, and they get incredibly overwhelmed because it's got all of these different things that they need to see. Now, what I would say to, rather than doing that, is pick selective skills that align with the job that you're trying to apply for, rather than looking at all of these different skills. This is like a menu in a restaurant. You want to select carefully the things that you actually want. You don't want to order one of every different thing off the menu, because that just doesn't make sense. So don't be like Pokemon trying to catch all of the skills. Pick skills that align with the job that you want to do and the direction you're heading. Let's take another question. So vendor locked-in versus technology standards. As companies tend to choose multi-cloud, should we pick one cloud provider and direct education to one vendor? Or try to keep an open eye on at least one more competition, AWS, GCP, or Azure? Ultimately, should you choose one or more cloud providers? This is a good question. So when it comes to actually picking different skills for your resume, things like should you choose AWS, GCP, or Azure, what I often talk to people about is these 3 different tests. These are the golden rules that I should apply, or you should apply, to your different skills for your roadmap that you're building. Those are those skills cohesive? What I mean by that is, do those skills complement each other, or do they pull each other in different directions? If you're a builder, do you need to learn to become an electrician? Maybe not. Do you need to learn to become a plumber? Maybe not. The skills that you might learn as a plumber might not be related to being a builder. So that's kind of the same sort of analogy for cloud as well. Don't go off and learn a whole bunch of data skills if you're trying to become an architect, or don't go and learn a bunch of web development if you're trying to be a cloud engineer. So try to think about, do the skills that you're learning, are they cohesive? Do they play well together? Do they build a nice set of skills that align to the job that you want to do? And that's question number 2. Do those skills align with your goal? When you've picked a role, when you've picked a title, when you've picked those skills that you're going to learn, does adding additional skills, do they support your goal? Do they bring you closer towards it? Or are they aligned with a different goal? It's an important question to ask yourself. And then the last question is, are they duplicates? You'll find a lot of technologies within the cloud industry are similar to each other. So for instance, in the context of AWS or Azure, those are very similar because they're both cloud providers. So if you're a beginner, you might want to pick one, double down on it, and then you can come back and learn the others maybe later in your career or at a later stage. One thing that people don't realize is a lot of companies are quite flexible in terms of skills. So it took me the best part of 2 minutes to find you a job description that basically showcases exactly what I mean. Taking this example, this particular job description just said that they want experience with any web programming language. So in that sense, you can just then apply for that job, having known one of the different languages that they list, but they're not necessarily picky about the specifics. So they say JavaScript, Python, Ruby, or Java will be accepted, but they prefer C#.NET. Now in that case, you don't need to learn all of those different You don't need to learn all of those different programming languages. You can learn just one and then still apply for those jobs. Lots of people don't realize that, so you want to try and eliminate duplicates. There's no reason to learn multiple skills that do essentially the same thing, especially if you're tight on time and you don't have a lot of time to be learning every different skill. So let's take a couple examples. Let's say you're a cloud engineer. That's your goal, that's your direction in the cloud industry. You've already learned Amazon Web Services and you're thinking about adding Azure to your stack and learning that as well. So I'd ask you the question, are these cohesive? Do they work well together? Well, for a cloud engineer, they kind of do because they're cloud providers, but at the same time, they kind of pull you in different directions because they're different ecosystems. So I would actually argue in some ways that those are not necessarily cohesive skills, so you might want to pause and think about that. Do they align with the goal of a cloud engineer? Yeah, I would say that they do. Cloud providers makes a lot of sense. But are they duplicates? I would say, yeah, they kind of are. You know, Amazon Web Services and Azure, they do similar things. Now, of course, some companies are multi-cloud, but as a beginner, don't worry about that. You want to think about building depth of experience in a few different specific areas and not spreading yourself too thin so that you don't actually know anything about anything in particular and you couldn't actually execute on that in a working environment. So I've gone ahead and ticked those there. So if you're a cloud engineer looking to learn Azure when you already know AWS, I would be a little bit hesitant to suggest that. Let's say you're a software engineer and you're looking at these different infrastructure as code tools like Terraform and CloudFormation. Let's ask ourselves the same question. Are these skills cohesive? Yeah, they kind of are because they're both infrastructure as code tools. They do align with each other. Do they align with the goal though of a software engineer? Maybe not. Lots of software engineers don't actually touch infrastructure. Some do, more like cloud software engineers, but typically if you're going for a purist sort of software engineer role, I wouldn't suggest necessarily learning an infrastructure as code tool, or it wouldn't be very top of my list, put it that way. And are they duplicates? Yep, they actually are. Now Terraform is an open source alternative, CloudFormation is specific to Amazon Web Services, but they both provision infrastructure in the cloud. So what I would probably suggest to you instead is just learn one, and then a lot of those skills will apply over, and you'll see in the job descriptions, like before, that a lot of employers will accept, if you know Terraform, they'll just say, we want you to know infrastructure as code. They won't necessarily specify exactly which tool that you need to know. So would I learn CloudFormation if I already knew Terraform as a software engineer? Again, probably not. Now, what about Python? Let's say you're a cloud engineer who knows Terraform. Should you learn Python? Well, I would say that these are cohesive skills. Python is very common in the cloud engineering space, so it's actually quite a good tool or a technology to learn. It's a programming language. And does it align with the goal? Yep, I would say that it definitely does. And is it duplicate? Well, it's definitely not duplicate with Terraform. Depends what else you're learning. If you haven't learned a programming language already, no, it doesn't sound like a duplicate. So in that case, I would say, yeah, perfect. Add that skill to your stack. Seems like a good choice because it is cohesive with the skills you've got. It aligns with the goal, the role that you want in the industry, and it's not necessarily a duplicate skill. So think about that. Think about the different golden rules. Are your skills cohesive? Do they align with the goal, and are they duplicates? Let's go ahead and take another question. So this person asks, since the CNCF landscape is huge, how do you propose approaching skill elevation when there are numerous technologies to learn? Grasshopper approach, a bit of everything, choose 3 and study thoroughly, or stick to the dictionary, e.g. know enough to understand what others are talking about. Now, from everything that I've said so far, you should probably think that actually the answer is in the middle. So I would say choose 3. Choose a small select amount of areas to focus in. I would say definitely don't learn everything. That is going to lead to total misery. You're not going to be able to do it. It's, I absolutely would avoid what this person has called the grasshopper approach. And the dictionary approach also doesn't really make a lot of sense either. Yes, it makes sense to know about different technologies and maybe just read the introductory pages or the Hello World examples, but don't waste too much time trying to learn every different thing that exists in the industry, pick skills that align with your job, and then go from there. And if you haven't seen the CNCF landscape, this is what it looks like. Very overwhelming. Like I say, more like a restaurant menu than an actual learning plan. You definitely don't need to learn all of these. So yeah, once you set that direction, once you've picked those different skills, then you can start to accept and reject different bits of feedback. You can start to make sense of it. So when you ask questions like, should I learn Azure or AWS? It's easy to work out. If you want to be a cloud engineer focusing on the Amazon ecosystem, well then you probably shouldn't learn Azure because it's going to take you further away from your goal and it's going to be a distraction for you. And what I commonly suggest to people is work in bursts. So once you've got your skills, start to think about how you can work across small periods of time. I've put 2 months here as an example, but for you that could be, let's say, 2 weeks. And what you're going to do is you're going to get your head down, you're going to focus, you're going to build out your skills and really build some depth. And at the end of that, then you can seek feedback. Maybe that might be through applying to jobs. It might be by talking to people in the community or doing some practice interview questions. But then you're going to get that feedback and then you're going to, again, go back into the learning mode and then go through another sort of sprint of learning. It's just important that you don't constantly double second guess yourself. You're looking over your shoulder, you're seeing other things come in and you're getting distracted. That's what you want to avoid. Now lastly, if I was to summarize all of this into a single analogy, you would think about it like this. Sports players don't win by doing drills in isolation, like certifications or Udemy courses. It's a trap. It's very comforting to sit there in your bedroom going through a new Udemy course or taking another certification rather than exposing yourself to the job market. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this session, it's this, that you should work out what you're up against, which is the job market, and work out strategies that take into account gaps that exist in the market and opportunities that you can exploit. So what do the employers actually need? What are the roles that they want? What are the skills that they need? And then you're going to go forward from there. Don't just build up a whole bunch of skills and then hope that those match to a different job in the industry. It's just not going to work. Okay, so on to the cloud role part that most of you will be here for, to start to think about the different roles and directions you can go in. Like I said at the start, if you want a reference, you can find that at openupthecloud.com/system. I'll put that in the description below, but here's a nice reference for some of the different roles that you might want to research after this video. Now, whilst I've been in the industry, I've seen people try and categorize roles in so many different ways. There are so many different ways to slice and dice and try to categorize the different jobs that exist and some of the different job titles within the cloud industry. In fact, even this one on the bottom left here is created by Andrew to try and show the difference between some of these other roles like systems engineer and admin and developer and how those map to some of these other roles. But ultimately what it comes down to is there is no perfect way to group these cloud roles. That said, what I'm going to do today is actually break these down into 4 groups for you, and that's how I think about it, and I will categorize some of these jobs for you. Okay, so let's jump into that and look at the first one. So support. Support is a very common category of job that people like to go into when they're going into the cloud industry because it is not as technical as, let's say, an engineer type role or an architect role. It's more people oriented, transferable skills from other industries can apply, and usually the barrier to entry is a little bit lower. And a couple of different roles that are similar to support: help desk, support, of course, customer success. We've got manual QA here in account management. Manual QA is quality assurance, which is testing products. Now, when you do that manually, that can be done with a fairly low amount of skill, but it still requires you to understand technology. It starts to build your experience in the industry, which then can allow you to pivot into a more technical role, potentially into an automated quality assurance role. So I've added that in here as part of the support category. So those are some jobs that you might want to take a look at. Second category is manager or analyst. This is more of the people-oriented type roles, more people-facing business skills, facilitation, communication, working with stakeholders. And this can be a good opportunity if you're coming from a different industry where you've built out some of these skills already. Let's say you've got lots of communication skills, but you're still building out tech skills. Maybe a role that's heavy on the communication and business side and less so on the tech side might be a good opportunity for you given your past experience. A couple of different titles we've got here: different types of analyst, business, data and security analyst, account and sales executives. But then we also have different types of managers, product and project managers, even engineering managers as well. And then solutions architects, but client-facing ones. Now there's often 2 types of people, 2 types of solutions architect. One that is client-facing, which is often more pre-sales, that happens in the sales cycle and happens often before a product is sold to a customer. And then we have the sort of internal implementation builder type architect that I think most people commonly associate with the architect role. So I've put in here the client-facing solutions architect because some big cloud providers hire for more entry-level type of solutions architect roles, but they're a little bit different than your sort of traditional solutions architect. Third category I would say is engineer. Highly technical, you're coding, building, implementing. If you're less sort of interested in people, more sort of introverted and want to kind of work as an IC or someone that's doing sort of, sat in front of your computer, kind of solving jigsaw puzzles, then maybe the engineer track is right for you. Doesn't mean that it's easy and doesn't mean that it involves no communication at all. That's not true. Most, if not all roles are team playing roles like we mentioned at the start. So either way, engineer might be the right path for you. And again, some different engineering titles: software, DevOps, site reliability, cloud, data, security, QA, sales. Now I said that I wouldn't go into and discuss all of these in depth. You can certainly go and do some research, but of course, these are some different categories. They all have different specialties and work in slightly different ways inside the cloud and software industry. And then the last category is the architect. So architects are typically more visionary, they're high level, very sort of business facing and also technical at the same time. Lots of talking to stakeholders and interacting, persuasion, that kind of thing, speaking to executives and leadership and making high level decisions about your overall architecture and strategy. Now, architecture is usually a good role if you're coming into the cloud industry with experience already from let's say a consulting role or sales or something like that. Doesn't mean that you can't land it straight off the bat as an entry level, but I said, like before, maybe that is in more of a pre-sales capacity. Your technical architects tend to be people that have been in the industry for quite a while. However, that said, I have seen people come into the cloud from different industries who've landed jobs as an architect, so can be an option, but worth considering as well. Typical roles obviously have architect in the title: cloud architect, network, solutions architect. Again, different flavors of the architect title. So start to think about it. Which one of those categories has an affinity to you? When I've talked through those, potentially one of those has kind of stood out for you and made more sense for your particular situation and your past experience. But have a think which category you fall in. And I've shared some titles with you there as well that you can now go and have a look and research and see if those make sense for you as your first role. Start to think about different things. Are you visual? Do you like working with data? Maybe the data side of software and cloud makes sense. Do you want to work with people? Do you like breaking things? Maybe security, maybe site reliability engineering, maybe quality assurance makes sense for you. Do you want to be client-facing or internal? i.e., do you want to be working with customers? Do you want to be in a more sales or a customer-facing capacity? Or do you want to be on a team where you work day-to-day within a company, working towards some goal, building something, implementing something within a company or organization? Do you like investigations? Are you visionary or are you detail-oriented? These are all questions you want to ask yourself as you try to imagine yourself in some of those different categories or job roles. Now, let's actually go through and have a look at some different roles and start to build some example learning plans. But like I said at the start, roles are not exactly well defined, so we need a different type of strategy. We need a different approach. We can't just build a generic learning plan for, let's say, for a cloud engineer, because lots of companies have different types of cloud engineers that do slightly different things. So what should we do? How do we build a learning plan? Let's have a look. What I'm going to introduce you to here is basically what I've called the duck test. Now, this is actually a well-known idea that you can stick into Google, and basically means this: if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck, and that's the duck test. Now, we can apply that to jobs because lots of times companies will list a job, let's say as a cloud engineer, when actually the job description describes more of a software engineer. Or maybe they ask for an architect when it looks more like a cloud engineer. Ultimately, what this comes down to is it doesn't make sense to focus too much on the job description, too much on the job title and more on the actual description of the title. So once you've got your direction, you've got those skills, you've filled out that template that I shared from you before, what you can start to do is look at different job descriptions. Disregard the title because oftentimes employers don't 100% know exactly what they're looking for. And the skills within can often be related to the job that you're trying to get. Now, as GPS mentioned, she said the same thing on Twitter: when applying, care more about the description. Plenty of roles will give you cloud exposure without having cloud in the title. And that's exactly correct. So when it comes to the job hunt, if you're targeting, let's say, a DevOps engineer, don't be afraid to look at software engineer, cloud engineer, or some of these other similar titles, because you'll find that the skill sets are actually quite similar, because there isn't that sort of sense of consistency across the industry. Now, if you're doing the bootcamp, then you have some homework, which I'm going to go through today, and I'm actually going to do some here with you so that you know how to do it. But if you're not part of the bootcamp, you can still complete this, absolutely fine. You can still follow the steps here. Now, what I want you to do is take those 3 things we have just discussed, take those 4 different areas, those 4 categories, and look at some different job descriptions. Start to apply the mindset and think, well, which category is this? Is this more of an architect, more of an engineer, more of like a support role? Which, bucket does this fit into? That's one thing you want to start to think about. Then start to think about highlighting different skills and start to build like an example learning plan based on some of those different job descriptions. As you look at more and more job descriptions, you'll get a more solid idea of what that particular role does. And then you can start to build your own learning plan, start to fill out the different skills that you want to learn based on some of the job descriptions that you started to look at. Again, start to focus your learning plan against the market. Look at the local jobs available to you and then start to build skills that make sense based on the market that you want to enter. Okay, so let's take an example. I've actually filled in this template here with an example of similar how you might do it. So in this case, this person said, I'm going to become a cloud engineer. And why do they think that cloud engineer is right for them? Because they have a background in IT, which is great. And they said that they will focus on AWS, Python, Terraform, and GitHub Actions. And they've listed out a few things as well that they are not going to get distracted by, like Kubernetes or learning different cloud providers. So let's go ahead and take a look at some different job descriptions. We're going to highlight some of the key skills and we're going to figure out, is this learning plan a good fit for those job descriptions and should you apply? Let's go ahead and have a look at the first one. Like I said, a couple of job descriptions. So here we go. I've extracted this from a real job description that I found a couple of days ago. So it says here, hands-on experience with 1 or more languages, Java, Python, Go, JavaScript, C#, etc. Or experience working with cloud technology, hands-on experience with continuous integration and continuous delivery/deployment. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight the skills that jump out to me, and I'm going to as well assign to those some different technologies that I think would tick the box for this type of company. But have a look at that job description and see what sticks out for you. Here's what stuck out to me. The fact that they're asking for 1 or more language. So if we have a language, we've ticked that box. They're asking for a cloud technology, and then they're asking for continuous integration. So let's go ahead and assign technologies to each of those different categories. Let's say if you learnt Python, AWS, and GitHub Actions, you'd pretty much tick all of the boxes for this particular employer. So for our particular learning plan, we said we were going to learn AWS, Python, and Terraform. Perfect. That makes sense for this particular job description. Let's take another. Now this person asks for, or this job asks for, experience with cloud-based software development. Again, they're asking for AWS, Google, and Azure, or one of those. Using infrastructure as code patterns. Again, they don't mention which specific tool here. They just say infrastructure as code. Experience with any web programming language. JavaScript, Python, or Ruby, and C#.NET is preferred. Now they go on to explain a few other things. So if you want, pause the video, have a think, what would you highlight? What skills would you build in order to land this particular job? And then I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I would put. So here are the parts I would be focusing on. So they've mentioned cloud, infrastructure as code, programming language, and they've also mentioned down at the bottom some databases and continuous integration. So again, let's go ahead and put some logos, some tools against those. For the cloud, we've got AWS, Terraform for infrastructure as code, maybe Python as a programming language, and then for the different databases down here, MongoDB, Postgres. MongoDB is a NoSQL database and Postgres is a SQL one, and then GitHub Actions. So the learning plan that we put together just now had all of that except from some of the database concepts. I would still go and apply for this job description if I was building that certain learning plan. However, you might want to consider adding some database into there as well, because that might help you once you've gone through and learnt in a very solid way those initial skills that you were building. So if this was my learning plan, for sure, that also fits to that job description. Now lastly, let's take a final one. Now this one's quite long, so if you want, you can pause the video. And again, I'm going to highlight some of the key points on here, different skills I would focus on if I was looking at this as a job. So we've got cloud platform, we've got infrastructure as code with Terraform, Docker, CI/CD pipeline, and an object-oriented programming language. So again, some of those similar skills from last time, but in this case, maybe Google Cloud makes sense, but they do say similar. Terraform, Docker, GitHub Actions, Python. So again, it's quite a close fit. It's quite a close fit to the learning plan that we had before, include some of the same skills. So what I want you to do is, for your homework, is start to go through some of these different job descriptions and start to build your own learning plan. Look at what employers are asking for. Try to spot trends. Which different skills are they asking for that work together, and start to build your own learning plan. So that's your homework. Fill in the Journey to Cloud template. Which job do you want in cloud? What are the skills that you're going to learn? Think about those different 4 categories. Which is the category that stands out to you the most? And have a look at those roles that I talked about earlier on. Have a think about which are the ones that fit right for you. Here's a reference from openupthecloud.com/system that you can have a go through. And then once you build that direction, then you can start to field some of this different bits of feedback that might come through. And you can start to make sure that you only take on board feedback that's aligned with your goal, rather than getting pushed around in different directions. So fill out the template, add in what you want to do, and then start to think about how you can plug that gap, how you can bring your own skills towards the market, how you can find out what employers are actually after by looking at job descriptions, and then filling in those skills that you're going to learn. Think about the golden rules we talked about. Make sure your skills are cohesive. Try and avoid duplicates, and try and make those skills align with that job that you're trying to do. And remember, lastly, the journey is not a direct linear process. There might be steps back. It might mean that you want to take a support role before you go on to take a different role. Maybe you become a cloud engineer and then DevOps. Maybe architecture is the job role that you really want, but it makes sense to start off maybe as a software engineer or cloud engineer. That's absolutely fine. Everyone's journey is completely different. So don't worry, it can be a bit of a winding journey, and your journey might be different to other people, but don't worry, just take your time, do everything that you need to do, work hard, and then everything will come together in time. And remember, where you start is not where you end up. You know, you can start with one different role and then change. A lot of people get very caught up trying to chase after one specific job role or one specific goal in the cloud industry, but it doesn't really matter sometimes. You can start off. Sometimes an opportunity comes your way and then you take it, and just like some monkey bars, you're swinging your way through your career. Sometimes it's not as simple as a basic ladder or landing that job that you wanted straight away. Sometimes you have to take other jobs as a stepping stone to work your way through. And lastly, again, I just look forward to sharing your job post, or I got the job post. So when you land that job, I'm here to share it. The community is here to celebrate with you. Ask us questions and we'll do our best to support you. Like I say, if you have more questions for answers in the rest of the sessions that I'll be doing next month and the following months after, go ahead and put that openupthecloud.com/bootcamp survey. I'll leave a link down below as well so you can access that. And also, there you go. If you want to ask questions in the comment box down below, I'm more than happy to answer questions if you have them about specific roles or something like that. And also you can find me on social media. I tend to go by LouJB on almost all platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, that kind of thing. And then you can find Open Up the Cloud here on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, all under Open Up the Cloud handle as well. So thank you very much. Good luck with the bootcamp, and I will see you in the next session. And possibly we'll also do some Q&A and some chatting on social, or you can find me in the Discord channel for the cloud project as well. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon. Ciao.